Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of Poo Poo Park. In my last episode, I built a Poo Poo museum filled with plenty of galleries displaying poop. I also built an ornithomimus habitat which you can look into via the plaza. This series is a collaboration between me and Jurassic Jaws. So before I build the poop refinery, I've got to show off what he built in his episode as well. We can see that he built the zipline which gives you access to this new area, so let's just head down the zipline. Whoa, this is nice. Wait, no! Anyway, down here, he placed this little shelter down to protect from the sun and added this pretty little garden. He also built this tiny glass enclosure here housing some Homalocephali. Jurassic Jaws mentioned that this was a blueprint that he made, but I'm not sure if it's on the workshop. The enclosure he built was a Giganotosaurus enclosure, and I've gotta tell you, he absolutely nailed the waterfall placement here. Just look at that. Anyway, let's get to building Dr. Wu's secret evil poop refinery. Ugh, that sounds like something from a Dogman comic. Whatever. I started off with building this large concrete wall, which alone took 1 hour to build. I really wanted the wall to form a bit of a curve, but the process was way too finicky for me to be successful at doing that, so I just made the wall straight. Even with this slight change of plan, it still gives off the industrial vibe I was trying to go for. To fix the gap between the hole and the crust of the earth, I wedged in some wooden flooring to cover the hole. To fix the awkward transition between dirt and wood, I used some wooden fencing. I like to imagine that this wooden area would be a lookout spot for the security guards, kinda like those dudes in Jurassic World. I eventually covered the entire dirt wall with concrete, but there was one problem. The wall was way too bland. This is when I looked to the movies for some inspiration. Immediately, this wall reminds me of the Indominus Rex fencing, so I rewatched the scene where Owen and the two other dudes were inspecting the enclosure. I noticed there were these long metal columns which I knew could easily be replicated with the gantries in the game. I also noticed there was a little bit of dirt between each of the bricks, so I used the damage decals to replicate those. We didn't use individual bricks to build this wall, so I used an ordinary panel to split up the concrete into separate bricks. And in the end, we have the first wall I've ever built in the game. In my opinion, it's a good looking wall, but feel free to debate me. You may have noticed that this refinery will be split up into two levels, the top level and the bottom level. The top level is going to be filled with a bunch of Badlands and security stuff, while the bottom one will be filled with a whole lot of factory stuff. It's fairly barren up top, so it's quite hard to organize where things go. I decided that the best way to go about this was to just place things randomly. I placed a few watchtower looking thingies, a satellite, vehicles, and 3 cranes. I tried to solve this randomness issue by digging a hole in between all the cranes to add a little bit of the story. The story being, they're digging this hole because they think there's poop there, and they want to excavate the poop. And yeah, stuff like that. And that's pretty much the entirety of the Badlands section there. Since we're done with all of that, we can finally get to the fun stuff. The poop refinery. A factory is nothing without a truckload of conveyor belts, so the first thing we're gonna do is build some. For this, I used some primitives in the prop section to help me build the structure, laying one block on top of the other, coloring the final one black. I then used some thinner blocks to add as borders so that the poop rolling down the conveyor won't fall out. To add some direction, I placed some arrows from the front section onto the conveyor belt. To finish it all off, I add some gantries at the bottom for the industrial look. If you want to use the conveyor belt for factory stuff, don't you worry because I've added it to the workshop as a blueprint. The share code is on the screen right now. I connect the conveyors onto this great big wall. It looked pretty awkward just protruding from the panel, so I tried to fix it by putting a black box into it, acting like a hole. That didn't really cut it for me, so I scrolled through the prop section till I found this tent thing, and I'd say that satisfied me enough to move on to the next part. After I do the outline with snow, I followed the lines with the conveyor belts all the way through. Since there's a fair bit of turning going on, I had to create some curvy conveyors as well as these sort of intersecting ones too. Right here, you can see I built this circle thingy and this cave thingy. I lost the footage to building all of them, so I can't really explain how I did that in detail, but basically, for the circles, I just got a bunch of primitives, grouped them, then spun them around to make a circle. For the cave, I simply just used a bunch of wall pieces. The cave, by the way, is meant to be the place where some poop pieces are collected. Right now, it looks pretty bland, so I try to fix it using these trims. Then I use these weird clip-looking pieces as industrial greebling. It's pretty useless, but it makes the thing look nicer, so that's a win for me. I then border the edges with these thin pieces, then I try to find a sign to put on the entrance of the cave. I settled on the disabled toilet sign because, let's be fair, it looks like a dude on the toilet. And considering this is a poop factory in a Poo Poo park, it's pretty fitting. Since this thing must be absolutely covered in poop, I use some of the decal grudge's poop stains. Afterwards, I finish off by placing AC units, once again to aid in the industrial look. Moving away from the cave thingies, we move on to the circles. I place a T-Rex skull between the circles since I want to infuse T-Rex DNA to create a, Pooposaurus. Then I had some green glass panels to make it look like a radioactive bacta tank in the same way I built the circles. It looks pretty strange up close, but since the average guest isn't going to come into this factory, it should look fine from afar. Now, I extend the conveyor belt and copy paste the Rex skull tube to the other side of the facility. This time though, I replaced the skull with a massive load of poop to make the Pooposaurus synthesis faster. So that the two tubes will combine genetically and stuff, I added this massive tube connecting the two of them so they can mix together. Of course, that alone won't support itself, so I added these other poles to help it stay in the air. The next major structure is this poop container. I start off with building a ramp, then I dig underground to create the hole where the poop falls into. I steal one of the panels from the big wall we built earlier and use it as a wall inside of the hole. After a short amount of time, I eventually covered it all up. The wood from the panels didn't really belong in the factory, so I covered it with a bunch of grass flooring. Speaking of flooring, the grass at the bottom of the pit didn't quite look right, so I replaced it with even more concrete instead. Finally, I boarded the ramp with some trims and add a bunch of these pipe thingies as rollers so that the poop can fall into the hole in a more organized manner. And finally, I fill the entire pit with a whole lot of poop and add some poop smudge looking decals onto the wall as well. We've got to get the poop somehow, so we need dinosaurs specifically made for pooping. But first, we've got to build an enclosure for them, so that's what we're doing right now. After I place down the fence of the enclosure, I make a toilet for the dinosaurs by digging down in front of the weaker fencing. Inside the pit, I build this giant pipe out of primitives which will transfer the poop inside the hole onto the conveyor belts. I fill the pit up with a bunch of poop, and then I paint it with groundwater since, you know, it looks a lot like diarrhea. Afterwards, I place a bunch of poop down onto the conveyor belt and add some dinosaurs to fill the enclosures. I went with Struthiomimus and Archaeornithomimus since I didn't really want to waste the good dinosaurs for a useless project like this. Plus, they look like they could poop a lot too, so it'll be fine. To end it all off, I added some JP3 viewing towers to act as security buildings. To recap everything we've done in this video, we built a giant wall, a Badlands area, and a massive poop facility featuring a whole load of conveyor belts, 2 dinosaur species, poop collection bins, and Pooposaurus hybrid genetic modification thingies. Yeah, this video is pretty weird. Let's get it over with. Like, share, and subscribe, everybody!